Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about what I believe is one of the most remarkable economic developments we've seen since the war in Ukraine began. Russia, one of the world's largest producers of crude oil, a country that has spent decades building one of the biggest refining industries in the world, has now started importing gasoline from India. Now, countries import and export products all the time, but when you actually stop and think about what's happening here, it's unbelievable. Russia is drilling oil from its own oil fields. It's exporting that crude oil to India. India is then refining that Russian oil into gasoline, diesel, and other petroleum products. And then Russia is buying those products back from India. In other words, Russia is now paying another country to add value to its own natural resources. And economically, that's a complete reversal of everything Russia has spent decades trying to achieve. So today I want to explain why this is happening, why it matters, and why this is likely to cost Russia billions of dollars. But before we get into all of the details, if you're enjoying my videos, can you please give me a thumbs up and maybe hit that hype button if you can see it. It's just alongside the thumbs up. The hype basically gives me extra boost with the algorithm and promotes this video to more people. So if you could do that, that would be brilliant. And also, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It really does help me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. Now, when people think about oil, they generally imagine huge oil fields, drilling rigs and pipelines stretching across thousands of miles. But that's really only the first stage of the process. The oil that comes out of the ground is crude oil. It's essentially a raw material. You can't fill your car with crude oil. You can't put it into an aircraft. It has to be processed first. That processing takes place inside oil refineries. And this is where the real value starts to be created. Inside the refinery, crude oil is separated into dozens of different products. Things like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, heating oil, liquefied petroleum gas, lubricants, petrochemical feedstocks, road asphalt, and hundreds of other products that modern economies rely upon every single day. Every stage of the refining process adds value to the product. Every stage creates skilled jobs. Every stage generates tax revenues and increases profits. That's why countries all around the world try to move further up what economists call the value chain. Instead of simply exporting raw materials, they want to manufacture finished products because that's where most of the money is made. And for decades, Russia understood that. Russia wasn't simply an exporter of crude oil. It invested enormous sums building one of the largest refinery networks anywhere in the world. Its refineries process millions of barrels of crude oil every single day before exporting higher value products across Europe, Asia, and beyond. That allowed Russia to earn significantly more money than if it simply sold crude oil to all of its export countries. Everything changed following the invasion of Ukraine, however. As Europe dramatically reduced the imports of Russian energy, Russia was forced to find new buyers for its crude oil. The biggest winner from that shift was India. India rapidly increased imports of Russian crude, taking advantage of the substantial discounts Russia was forced to offer. At one point, India was importing over 2 million barrels of Russian crude oil every single day. More recently, those imports have risen to around 2.7 million barrels per day, accounting for more than half of India's total crude oil imports. That has transformed India into one of the biggest customers for Russian oil. Now here's where the story becomes really interesting. India doesn't possess vast oil reserve. It isn't one of the world's great crude oil producers. What India has done instead is invest heavily in refining capacity. It has spent years building one of the largest and most sophisticated refining industries anywhere in the world. The Jagdamar refining complex, operated by Reliance Industries, is widely recognized as the largest single oil refining complex on the planet, capable of processing 1.4 million barrels of crude oil every day. India imports crude oil from around the world. It refines that crude into higher value products such as gasoline and diesel, and then supplies its growing rapid economy, but also exports gasoline, diesel, jet fuel and petrochemicals to customers all around the globe. So India has created a whole industry despite not having much of the raw material itself. It imports raw materials and then processes it and exports it. and that's created thousands of skilled jobs in India and generated billions of dollars in export revenues. And most importantly, it captures the value added by refining. That's exactly what successful industry economies try to achieve. Instead of exporting cheap raw materials, they export higher value finished products. However, the irony of what's happened since the war in Ukraine started is that Russia is now importing gasoline from India because domestic fuel shortages have become so severe. And if you just think about that journey for the moment, Russia extracts the crude oil, Russia exports the crude oil, India buys it and then refines it and adds all of the value, earning all of the refining profit. India then exports that gasoline to Russia, who are paying a huge markup in value to buy it from India. If somebody had suggested that 5 years ago, that this would become the reality, I don't think any of us would have believed that Russia would have been importing gasoline and diesel from India, because that sounds crazy. Economically, it makes very little sense for one of the world's largest oil producers to become dependent upon another country for refined fuel made from its own crude oil. And that's why this story is so significant. Russia isn't simply importing fuel, it's surrendering a substantial part of the value chain here. The refining margin that once stayed inside Russia is now increasingly being earned elsewhere in the world. Instead of Russian refinery workers creating that value, Indian refinery workers are creating it. Instead of Russian refineries earning those profits, it's Indian refineries that are taking them. Instead of Russia collecting taxes on that additional economic activity, those benefits are flowing overseas to places like India. And the financial impact for Russia doesn't stop there. Russia is already selling much of its crude oil at discounted prices. It then pays to transport the crude oil thousands of miles to India. India is refining it, adding its own operating costs and its own operating profit margin. India is then shipping those refined products back across the ocean to Russia, and Russia is paying the market price to import them. So if you think about that, Russia is selling its crude at a discount, but it's paying full value for the gasoline. So every stage of this process transfers value from oil away from Russia. Economically, this is precisely the opposite of what countries normally want to achieve. One of the main reasons governments encourage industrial development is because processing raw materials creates wealth. It supports manufacturing, engineering, logistics, research and development, and creates long-term high-skilled employment. Oil refineries are not simply facilities. They represent billions of dollars of investment. They employ thousands of engineers, technicians, chemists, maintenance workers, and logistics specialists. Around every refinery sits an entire local economy. You've got contractors, suppliers, transport companies, equipment manufacturers, restaurants, shops, hotels. Thousands of livelihoods depend upon those facilities operating continuously 24/7. Refineries are also businesses with enormous fixed costs. Whether they produce 1 million barrels of oil or half that amount, many of those costs remain exactly the same. That's the definition of a fixed cost. The buildings still have to be maintained. The equipment still has to be serviced. The staff have to be paid. The debt on that facility still has to be financed. That's why refinery operators depend upon very high utilization rates. They need to operate all the time. Once throughput starts falling, profitability can disappear remarkably quickly. Over the past few months, we've discussed how repeated Ukrainian drone and missile attacks have targeted Russian refinery infrastructure. A number of refineries have been damaged. Many of them have been temporarily shut. Others have production disrupted. The result has been shortages of gasoline and diesel in parts of Russia, in fact most of it now, restrictions on fuel sales, some stations are limiting it to 20 litres, rising domestic prices, we've seen prices increase by around 50% in some regions over the past couple of weeks, and increasing pressure on the government to maintain supplies. And now, remarkably, those shortages have become so severe that Russia has started importing gasoline from one of the very countries that has benefited the most from purchasing discounted Russian crude oil. There's also a wider lesson here. For decades, economists have argued that countries relying solely on exporting raw materials often struggle to generate sustained long-term prosperity. The real wealth is created further down the production chain. Countries become richer by processing raw materials, manufacturing products, and exporting higher value goods. What's striking about recent events is that Russia appears to be moving backwards along that chain rather than forwards. Instead of exporting more sophisticated products, it's increasingly reliant upon exporting discounted crude oil while importing some of the higher value products made from that same oil. That represents a significant loss of economic value. It represents lost industrial activity, lost profits, lost tax revenues, and ultimately lost opportunities for the Russian economy. So whilst you might have seen the headlines talking about a few shipments of gasoline arriving from India, I think the story is much bigger than that. This isn't simply about fuel shortages, it's about Russia's changing position within the global energy industry. A country that once controlled every stage of the process is increasingly finding itself supplying the raw material while others capture a growing share of the profits. And from an economic perspective, that's a remarkable reversal. Now, I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you've enjoyed today's episode, then please give me a thumbs up. Please hit that hype button if you can, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much to everyone that's supported me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you for that support. Really does help to keep me focused and making videos like this. So thank you if you're one of those people. Really appreciate it.